Further afield, the Israeli military says it's now implementing targeted ground raids in Lebanon. In a statement, it says the assault, backed by airstrikes and artillery, began a few hours ago, targeting Hezbollah in villages close to the border with Israel. Hezbollah and Israel have been exchanging nearly daily airstrikes, or strikes rather, since the October 7 attacks last year. Let's get you some analysis on the situation there and bring in senior researcher at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, Na'eem Jeenah. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Hard to believe, Na'eem, that we're coming up now just a few weeks away from, or I should say days away from the year mark, 1 year on, since the October 7 attacks of 2023.
Yes, 6 days away from that, and we are now in a place where things are, in a sense, much worse. We had almost a year of genocide in Gaza, now a new front opening up in Lebanon, and the devastation we saw in the past week or 2 weeks in Lebanon, in various parts of Lebanon, including its capital, Beirut. I mean, just last night, another 13 buildings were bombed and collapsed under Israeli bombardment. So it's not easing up, it's getting much worse.
So can you help us understand, Na'eem, where we place this increase in this escalation in the offensive against Hezbollah by Israel? Of course, we've just been talking about the fact that it's 6 years since we're on the 1 year mark since the October 7 attacks of last year. But it's also just weeks after the Hezbollah leader was also killed.
Days after, yeah, he was assassinated on Friday. There are a few things. One is, of course, that Hezbollah kind of opened the front in the northern part of Israel after the 7th of October, on the 8th of October, as a way of, we might say, distracting the Israeli response from a full-on response to Gaza, and distracting it to include the north as well. That full-on response to Gaza did happen, and as the South African government says, what we're seeing in the past year is a genocide taking place in Gaza. But on the Israeli northern front, there's been a kind of ongoing daily exchange of fire across the border between Israel and Hezbollah. For Hezbollah, it was kind of a victory, the fact that Israel evacuated that area, the northern part of Israel, of all its citizens in order to prevent any harm from befalling them. That continued until a few weeks ago. And then Israel kind of turned its attention in a much bigger way to Lebanon with the assassination of one of the Hezbollah commanders, Fuad Shukr. Then you had the pager attacks and the walkie-talkie attacks, and then the assassinations of a number of Hezbollah commanders, including the head Hassan Nasrallah. Now, the reason for this, is open to speculation. But one reason is that Netanyahu's government in Israel has, after a year, been unable to achieve any of the goals or targets that it set for itself in Gaza. It has not managed to rescue the captives that are being held in Gaza. It has not managed to destroy Hamas as it said it would. It has not managed to dismantle the infrastructure, the military infrastructure of the various resistance groups in Gaza, not only Hamas but the others as well. And that's after a year. And these groups are, of course, put together much weaker than Hezbollah is. So what it did was it created a new goal, which it felt was more achievable, and therefore the government could claim that it has won something at least. And that is that it said that it wanted, or its objective now, was to have the return of the Israelis from the northern part of Israel. And that meant striking hard against Hezbollah. Then, after the assassination of Nasrallah, it added an additional goal, which was the destruction of Hezbollah and its eradication from Lebanon. That goal, it's not going to meet. I mean, it's, as I said, Hezbollah is much stronger than the resistance in Gaza. Israel has not been able to overcome that resistance in a year. And what we saw over the past 24 hours or so, Israel kind of sending in a few thousand troops into Lebanon. Last night, them being forced back. Fierce resistance from Hezbollah fighters. And so it's not going to be the kind of walk in the park for the Israeli army as Israel is making it sound. And it's not going to get the easy victory in the north that it claims it will. And I think that victory will be denied just as it has been in Gaza.
There are other things that ring true or that remind us of Israel's attacks on Gaza over the past year, Na'eem, insofar as Lebanon and this ground offensive, as Israel calls it, and airstrikes over the past couple of days. The Air Force, says Israel, is supporting ground forces with very precise strikes. Israel says it has known targets that it wants to hit in particular areas of Lebanon. But of course, we know that has not happened just today. There was a first strike on Lebanon's largest Palestinian camp. This is a refugee camp since these cross-border hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel broke out now also a year ago. The point is, these so-called precise strikes more often than not tend to hit the most vulnerable people.
So it's a combination, despite whatever Israel claims, it's a combination of actual precise strikes and just widespread bombing. We're seeing that in various parts of Lebanon. But even with the so-called precise strikes, I mean, the Israeli politicians have said in the past that the acceptable ratio for them is 100-1. Which means that if they have one person as a target, they're willing to kill 100 civilians around that person. And so we saw with the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah on Friday, in one of the most densely populated places in the world, the southern suburbs of Beirut, Israel dropped 85 one-ton bombs in order to kill him. We're still not sure how many hundreds of Lebanese were killed in that process, as well as the other assassinations and how many civilians were killed in that. So so the precise strike is precise in terms of hitting a particular target, but Israel is completely unconcerned about who else might die in the process. And then there's the kind of widespread bombing that's taking place. In Al-Hilwa, the refugee camp that you spoke about, is in that latter category. There might have been one target, I think, that they were aiming for, but it was a widespread bombing in that refugee camp. So it's not just Hezbollah people that have been assassinated now in Lebanon. It's also a few Palestinian leaders. In Al-Hilwa case, it was a leader of the armed wing of Fatah, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. There were also two assassinations of leaders of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and one Hamas leader as well. So, I think part of the objective is to take out leadership, Palestinian and Hezbollah leadership, but part of it also is to create a kind of, if you like, shock and awe kind of situation in Lebanon that will force the Lebanese population, Israel hopes, to distance themselves from Hezbollah because it is too dangerous for them.
Right.
And all of this together is creating a massive humanitarian problem that even the UN says it's not going to be able to meet.
So several Hezbollah commanders have been killed in these intensive airstrikes, but about 1,000 civilians have also been killed. 1 million more, according to the Lebanese government, have been forced to flee their homes. Just these past 2 weeks, it's dealt a major blow, this invasion of Lebanon, a major blow to Hezbollah. You talked about the pages, the booby-trapped pages, walkie-talkies, the killing of the Hezbollah head Hassan Nasrallah just last Friday. At what stage, Na'eem, does the Lebanese army, get involved?
The Lebanese army is actually a weaker military structure than Hezbollah's military wing is. So the Lebanese army is not going to get directly involved in any kind of battle situation. The caretaker prime minister, because Lebanon doesn't have a real prime minister yet at the moment, the caretaker prime minister Najib Mikati has offered in a sense, though sincerely, but calling the bluff of the United States. United States said it wants a ceasefire. Mikati offered that the Lebanese army would deploy to the southern part of Lebanon in order to maintain a ceasefire together with the United Nations forces. The response from the Pentagon in the U.S. was to express that they fully supported the Israeli position. So the Lebanese army is not going to get involved in any kind of way. They've actually withdrawn into their barracks. The battle that we're seeing, or the battles that we're seeing, like overnight last night, are between Hezbollah forces and the Israelis. While Hezbollah has certainly been degraded, the number, I think more than 10 of its top leadership has been assassinated for, as you said, more than 1,000 civilians. Hezbollah has always had deputies ready to fill in, and deputies of deputies, and then shadows of those. So in the short term, it's a massive blow for Hezbollah. But they will recover within months they will recover. And the forces on the ground, in particular those in the south of Lebanon, the kind of special forces, if you like, of Hezbollah, the Radwan forces, they have been hunkered down and waiting for the opportunity to confront the Israeli army, and have not seriously been affected by these assassinations. So Israel has also managed to, of course, degrade Hezbollah's weaponry, but we're not sure by how much. Some estimates say only 10%. I think an Israeli estimate says 10% of its weaponry. That means that the large part of its weaponry is still available and accessible for use against the Israeli forces. And so what we're seeing now slowly unfolding in the south of Lebanon, with the Israeli invasion, them being pushed back last night, and that will go back and forth, is not going to end in the next few days. I think that we're looking at something that will take months at least.
Yeah, that was my next question to you. How long does this operation last? And it's such a feeling of deja vu, because these were the questions we were asking after October 7 last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it's going to take at least months. The Hezbollah forces, if the past 24 hours is anything to go by, they've been waiting for a ground invasion, because that's where they actually have forces and they can deal with it. They, of course, can't deal with being bombarded from the air. And the Israelis, now having taken that step of invading Lebanon, are not going to be able to simply pull back. And so I think that this engagement could last months. Remember that on previous occasions when Israel invaded Lebanon, they stayed for months and even years. But this time around, they're facing an enemy that is much stronger than then, even with its degraded capacity. So you could look at an engagement, a war that goes on for many months into next year, perhaps into later next year. And as I said, if the Israeli army wasn't able to defeat the resistance in Gaza, which is a much weaker force, and with essentially homemade weapons, they're not going to be able to destroy Hezbollah as they're claiming they can in a year's time.
And just as is the case in Gaza, the civilian death toll continues to rise. Na'eem Jeenah, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. He's the senior researcher at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection.